Hey everybody, the Korea Space Forum. I hope you're having a great event and it's all going really well. I'm sure it is. Sorry I can't be with you. I hope to be there in the future. Thanks very much for inviting me along to talk about sustainable space today. Let's get started. Hopefully you can all see my screen. All right. So my name is Daniel Smith and I am the founder of AstroAgency. I'm also a director of Space Scotland, and I've been asked to speak a little bit today about how to approach eco-friendly space development in the context of what we've been doing in Scotland in particular, but across the UK and our vision for a sustainable space sector. So just before I get into that, I wanted to give you a little bit of background, first of all, on AstroAgency, who we are, and just to give you that kind of feel for where I'm coming from, really. So AstroAgency, we're set up to be the first strategic marketing organization company to focus purely on the space sector. And what we do is your typical marketing tasks, so things like logos and taglines, brand development, core values, and PR, space PR and media as well. But beyond that, we do a lot of market intelligence too. So we support companies with our technical team, which we realize we need to have for the space sector because there's so many kind of interesting areas of space, a lot of complexities and a lot of politics and legislation, standards, regulations to think about too. So we figured get a tech team in place and build a management team all from the space sector. And with that, we're able to provide introductions and connections, market intelligence, market knowledge, and really build up a good idea of what our clients need to do in terms of reaching new revenue streams for their business. And then the marketing, of course, kicks in after that, and we're able to help reach the target audience that they need. So we work with around 30 different space companies over the world, and we also work with governments too. So we work with the UK Space Agency, for example, on different projects, and we work with Scottish Government and its agencies as well, just to support them and guide them in the area of new space, particularly new space, new commercial space. So with that, I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about the UK space sector, because although I'm going to be coming from the Scottish angle today, it is worth bearing in mind that we are still very much part of the UK. And so, we're part of that proposition and we're aligned with what's going on across the UK. Worth also mentioning that although the UK is no longer part of the European Union, we are still part of the European Space Agency. So just to kind of make sure that that's known as well. So the UK space sector, this is a bit of an overview on this slide. It just shows you how many companies are there, and you might be surprised to see how many space companies are operating. This will have gone up a lot. Those figures are already quite outdated, as you can see. We've got a lot of people working in the space sector. It is a very fast growing, exciting area of space, and I know that's the case across the world right now. So it's something the UK are very focused on, and the government is behind. UK government and the Scottish government is very much behind as well. And on the Scottish space cluster in particular, again, despite the fact we are a small country with around 5 million people, it's an area of growth for us, the space sector, and an industry that seems to be growing and growing and improving all the time. More jobs, more companies being created, despite the pandemic and all the challenges that we've had. So yeah, really exciting area for Scotland as well. And as I've mentioned, the government very much behind it, the government agencies and the government realizing that there are so many benefits to the space sector for the economy, for the environment, which we'll be talking a lot about today, for jobs, and yeah, just to really inspire people too, inspire young people, which is obviously a very important part of what we all do in the space sector. So we have something quite unique in the UK, and talking from the Scottish side, we have this full value chain, this end-to-end capability that we like to speak about, and that's the production of payloads. So we design and build payloads, small satellites in particular. Launch vehicles too. There's 2 orbital launch vehicles being developed in Scotland at the moment. We've got launch sites that I'm going to talk a little bit about today in the context of sustainable space, and we've got a thriving downstream ecosystem as well. That's the space data side of things. So that's what we mean when we talk about end-to-end. On top of that, we've got a supply chain that's growing that can feed into that value chain, into that end-to-end capability. And we've also got our eye on the future as well. A lot of really interesting technical advancements around space. We're looking at things like quantum and a bunch of other things you can see there on the slide. Now, this slide gives you an idea of some of the companies that are part of that ecosystem, that space landscape in Scotland. This is not all the companies by any means, but again, it just divides it between the different segments of that value chain. And what I'd like to point out in particular here is the research quadrant of this flag, because it's definitely worth noting that we've got a very strong academic backbone, universities in Scotland, really world-class universities with great expertise in space subjects that have provided that resource, I suppose, and really underpinned the fast-growing space sector that we have in Scotland around commercial space. I'll just point out the logo in the middle there, Scottish Space Leadership Council. So that is now known as Space Scotland. And that's an industry-led group that brings together the companies that you see on this slide to really drive the sector forward. There's no fees or anything like that. It's very much a voluntary approach, and we have a chair. And yeah, basically we all get together to look at what are the opportunities in the space sector, what are the challenges, and how do we work together on them. We leave our business cards at the door. We think about the sector itself. It also involves academia, which is really useful to have space universities involved, and government take part in our meetings as well for Space Scotland. And it's great because we're a small country, and it just keeps everybody on the same page and able to work together and support each other. And having that government inclusion in these meetings, it just really helps to create a very fast moving sector, which is what we need, because it is, after all, commercial new space. So I just want to dig into a little bit more detail, a bit deeper onto what we've got in Scotland when we talk about that end-to-end capability. And it's not something that I can say that we planned for, but for many years now, we've seen this blossoming of the space sector. And I just want to talk a little bit more about that. So in terms of CubeSats, we actually build more small satellites in Scotland and in the city of Glasgow in particular than any other city in the world outside of the US. So it's quite a significant amount of small satellites, CubeSats, and indeed pocket cubes being built in Glasgow. We often say that we used to build ships in Glasgow. It was a very big industrial area and shipbuilding was common, but now we build spaceships. At the other end of the spectrum of the value chain, we have the data side. So we have a thriving, established data ecosystem, particularly in Edinburgh, but across Scotland. And Edinburgh, the capital, is positioning itself as the space data capital of Europe. So it's an area that we're really looking to capitalize on. And again, the universities are a big part of that. The University of Edinburgh and other universities in Scotland are supporting that. And you can see some of the logos. Again, it's not all of the space data companies that we've got, but it gives you an idea of some of them. And there's some really interesting things happening, coming out of the work that these companies are doing. For example, GSI, which is an Edinburgh-based data company working with Omanos Analytics, a Glasgow-based space data company. They're using satellite data and working on projects such as the Geothermal Kenya project in Africa with support from the UK Space Agency. And just another one, and I could talk to you all day about data and the stuff that's going on in Scotland around space data and satellite data. But this is one I like to always mention as well. It's another company in Edinburgh called AstroSat. And during the pandemic's lockdown, they used space data. They worked with charities and they helped charities to identify people who are in isolated areas, so communities in isolated areas, so that those charities could then go out and just check on people and make sure that mentally, their mental health being, but also their physical well-being was all okay. And I just love that idea that space data can actually help with mental health. It really, for me, it shows that when it comes to the data coming from space and the satellites, that you're really only limited by your imagination. And that for me is really exciting. There is one area though that's missing from this value chain, from this end-to-end ecosystem, and that of course is launch. And at the moment, this is a good kind of overview. At the moment, we have 7 developing spaceports across the UK. Again, I'm going to focus on Scotland spaceports for the purposes of this presentation today, as I've been asked to come along and talk about Scotland's approach to sustainability in space. But that just gives you a real idea of how the UK is taking launch very seriously. And we're talking about small launch here. So it's small satellites on small launchers from small spaceports, and very much focused on bringing data back then. It's not about astronauts and it's not about Cape Canaveral type launches here. But there's a really interesting thing happening in the UK and around launch, and that's the kind of missing piece of the jigsaw, I suppose. If we can get launch right, then we're really connecting that whole value chain. And what some people on this at this event today might not know is that there's never been orbital launch from Europe of a launcher for satellites or any other kind of rocket launch. So if we can get this right, we could be the first place in Europe to provide access to space. So it's a really exciting opportunity for Scotland and for the rest of the UK. What I'd mention as well is it's not just vertical space flight, it's horizontal too. So this is an example with Prestwick Spaceport, where they're looking to use established infrastructure at the Prestwick site, which is actually Scotland's biggest aerospace cluster already. So they've got a lot of the skills that they need there. They've got the airport infrastructure, and now they're looking to adapt that so they can also add satellite launch capability. And they're working with their partners, AstroAgency, who are a company based in the UK with roots in the US as well. There's another horizontal spaceport in Scotland called Machrihanish that's in development. When it comes to vertical spaceports in Scotland, we have 3 developing. We have the Shetland Space Centre, which is now Saxe Voord Space Centre, and that's in the very, very north. So I mentioned geography earlier, and that's a real key selling point for Scotland. The fact that we're able to offer small launches, a lot of that is down to the geography side of things. So for vertical launch, it's really ideal. We also have Sutherland Spaceport, Space Hub Sutherland, and they are interestingly positioning themselves as the greenest spaceport on Earth, which I think is really exciting. And again, it just gives you a bit of a taste of what's to come in this presentation, that we are thinking about sustainable launch. The other vertical spaceport in Scotland is on the Western Islands, and it's called Spaceport 1. So with all that going on, we decided to pull together our first ever space strategy this year. And the UK, on the right-hand side, you'll see the UK strategy, which was launched in September this year. Scotland's strategy came shortly after that. It came along in October, and we launched that at Expo Dubai. And it very much feeds in and supports the ambitions of the whole of the UK, as you would expect. One thing I'd say about Scotland is that we've really identified in that strategy, along with diversity and inclusivity and launch and other areas, we've identified a key area that we think we can lead on, and we think that we can really provide both thought leadership, but also true actions that can help, and that's towards sustainability and this idea of sustainable space. So sustainable space, what am I talking about? And how do we approach this idea of being a sustainable space nation? Well, I've put down 3 areas that I think we need to be considering straight away. So the first is to define sustainability in the space sector. What does it mean when we're talking about sustainability? Can a space sector be sustainable? Is it possible? And if it is possible, can it be done without considering launch, for example? And then you've got to determine why you're going on this journey. So it's very clear in Scotland and indeed throughout the UK that we want to do things the right way. We're developing launch in particular from scratch, from the very beginning. And so there's an opportunity to do it in a way that's quite unique around the world. And what I'd say is the right way to do it, in a way that helps towards net zero ambitions. But also because it's a distinguishing factor. And if we can offer a place in Scotland for launch vehicles to come and launch from, and satellite payloads to be launched from, where we can truly show that we're providing a real sustainable offering, a sustainable proposition, then I think that will attract inward investment, and it will really make people interested in coming along and launching from Scotland. Although we do have spaceports there, we have launch vehicles there, but it's a USP for us, sustainability. And the other most important thing, which I don't think should come as a surprise, and one of the reasons why I'm speaking here today, is around collaboration. It's very important that we all collaborate together. So if you're looking to build a sustainable space sector, you cannot do it on your own. You have to collaborate. Okay, so let's start with defining sustainable space then. The BBC recently looked at Scotland and asked the question, how green is Scotland's space industry? And I was interviewed by them, and I talked about the importance of that initial definition. If you can't really put into words what sustainability means for space, then you're going to struggle to tackle it, to deal with it properly. So what are we talking about when we talk about sustainable space? And can launch be sustainable? So if I start with launch, and I think we should start with launch because it's probably the area that's most difficult to be sustainable. So I don't want to move it aside or put it under the carpet. We need to deal with it up front and think about what does it mean to be sustainable when it comes to launch. can launch ever be truly sustainable? And I think it's very difficult for launch to be net zero. I hope I'm wrong about that. But I think that launch can play its role and it can contribute to net zero. And when you combine those efforts with the rest of the value chain, and I'll talk about that in just a second, I think that it creates a much more sustainable overall proposition, a holistic proposition. You know, when you're combining it with payload satellites that are built in a more sustainable way and developed in a way that they'll deorbit quicker, or using materials that burn up in the atmosphere, etc. I think that it can be a wider, stronger proposition. And I want to point out that the two orbital vehicles in Scotland are very much looking at sustainability as a core value and as a USP, a unique selling point for their businesses. So Skyrora on the left are developing what's called EcoScene, which is a fuel from non-recyclable plastic that they will use as one of their propellants. And Orbex is a company based in the north of Scotland that are developing a biopropane, a renewable fuel that they believe will be up to 90% less carbon intensive than any other launch vehicle in the world. So that's exciting. And it's also worth mentioning the spaceports here around launch. Obviously, it's not just about rockets, it's about the spaceports too. And I've mentioned the aspirations of Sutherland to be the greenest spaceport on Earth. They're developing their infrastructure and their activity there in a way that they believe can be net zero or even negative carbon. And you know, Prestwick, I've mentioned earlier today, the horizontal spaceport, they've just submitted their environmental screening report. Again, very much looking at how they can provide launch services and launch capability for the first time in Europe in a sustainable way. So aside from launch, the other area that you might think about when you think about sustainability would be space data. And I've talked about Scotland's thriving ecosystem around data. But at AstroAgency, we work with companies all over the world that are using space data in incredible, unique ways. And almost always there's a sustainability and environmental protection element to it. So there's a word cloud here just to show some of the examples of how space data can be used. Ultimately, this is the key point, I think. You know, if we don't have satellites up there, then we're going to struggle to be able to do a lot of the things we're doing to track the environment, to keep an eye on climate change, and indeed to track illegal fishing activity, illegal mining activity, you know, moisture levels in soil to stop landslides, or indeed soil erosion, coastal erosion, deforestation, that type of thing. So the space data is critical. It's critical for fighting climate change. So it's very important. It's a huge piece of this puzzle for sustainability. And without the launch side, you won't have that satellite data. You won't have that information. So then launch becomes very much an enabler for this data, which is so important. But what else? It's not just launch and data. We're missing something here, and that is space debris and space junk. So we know that when it comes to LEO, this is also an area of sustainability we should be thinking about. And what we're doing in Scotland, and I know many people around the world are doing, is they're thinking about LEO almost as one of Earth's environments, right? It's not just our on-Earth environments we should be thinking about. We also need to treat low Earth orbit as if it's part of Earth's environmental ecosystem. And as long as we do that, we'll start to think about how we can protect low Earth orbit. So that for us in particular, and I would advise anyone who's thinking about sustainability, I would include low Earth orbit, and I would include it because it is part of Earth's ecosystem. And if we don't look after it, we're going to be in big trouble in many ways, not least the fact that satellites could be damaged that are able to provide us with important information to help us with sustainability. But also there's a number of other reasons why it's critical that we try to prevent space debris building up, and we try to clean up low Earth orbit. I'd also add one more thing when it comes to the what else section too, just to give you an idea of how much we're looking at this value chain and how thorough we're looking at sustainability. We're not trying to hide anything here. This is not about greenwashing. We want to look and be held accountable for everything that space is involved in. So I would also talk about things like, you know, if we have launches in Scotland, for example, people will be driving, most likely tourists might want to watch a launch, so they'll drive there or they'll travel to the launch site. So we should be thinking about that and the carbon impact of that. Or when there are launches, there will be ships that are having to move around and avoid areas where the launch vehicle stages might drop, or indeed, you know, aircraft activity that has to change and aircraft being rerouted because of launches. Again, that will have an environmental impact. That will have a carbon footprint, and so we need to think about that too. And I think when it comes to sustainability, the only way to do it properly is to think about all these things that I've mentioned. So that's what we're trying to do at the moment in Scotland, in the work that we're doing in AstroAgency to support some of the movements and initiatives around sustainability. Just to talk about one of those initiatives now. So I mentioned earlier Space Scotland, which is this industry-led group that we have. And as part of that, we have a task force in that group called the Environmental Task Force. And that was set up to look at how can we approach sustainability and indeed address some of the questions that I've talked about with you guys today. What we did very early on is we decided to create the Sustainable Space Challenges, which is an initiative that really looked at, okay, what is sustainability? How do we address this? Can we do it in Scotland? And who should we be working with internationally, because you can't do it alone, right? So what we did is we reached out to anybody that would listen, really, schools, environmental groups. We reached out to universities, the general public, and we asked for any problems, any challenges that space could solve around the environment. And we got some fantastic submissions. There were around 30, 40, 50 different challenges that were put to us. So as an industry sector, and I lead this task force with my colleague Christina from the University of Edinburgh, and we didn't want to kind of assess these challenges ourselves because it didn't seem right that the space sector should be choosing which challenges to address. So what we did is we pulled together six judges on a panel, and you can see those judges there. We have people from environmental groups. We have Morva Jha from the University of Texas at Austin in the United States, who's very, very strong around space debris. People from business, people from various fields, science and technology and inventors, to help us to decide, okay, what are the challenges we're going to address for this particular initiative to kickstart our move towards being a country that takes space sustainability seriously. And from there, we pulled together the challenges that we wanted to address. And there was one, unsurprisingly, around launch. There was one around in-orbit debris. So this is junk and LEO, and keeping it. How do we deal with that? How can Scotland play a role in some kind of role in to prevent this problem? And the third one was around using space debris and enabling citizen scientists to use space debris to help the environment. So it was a really interesting initiative that we did. And it led to some great discussions. So we pulled together anybody from the sector, any companies or universities or anybody really that wanted to help with these challenges. We came together, we did workshops, and we started to look at the questions that we'd received, and we started to try to figure out, okay, we're not going to decide the answers, we're not going to fix space debris in a couple of weeks or months, but where do we start if we want to do it? And how can we play our role on the international stage, on the global stage? How can Scotland play a role in improving this situation? So we set up 3 different workshops, working groups that then addressed the 3 challenges that I mentioned earlier. And from then we had a summit where we invited anybody to come and listen in to what we were doing in Scotland. And that was a chance for industry to feed back to the people who had set the challenges, but also to the wider public to explain how we think we can come up with ideas and indeed get some good feedback. So it was a really successful event. Around 500 people joined. It was all done online with Dallas Campbell, broadcaster, and indeed Susie Imber from the University of Leicester hosting it with us. And we were lucky enough to have the ESA Director General say a few words to kick the conference off. And also First Minister Nicola Sturgeon also said some words at the beginning of the conference. And I think that again shows how behind this idea of sustainable space the government is. So it's very exciting, and it really galvanizes industry when it comes to thinking about how we can tackle this problem. And here's a quote from Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, just to show how serious that she's taking the subject. So when it comes to that journey then, and once you've defined sustainable space and what you feel it means for you, and you figure out, what are the next steps, really, you start to go on this journey. And this is where we are at the moment. We've not solved it. I wouldn't say that we're the most sustainable space-faring nation yet in the UK or in Scotland, but we'd like to get there, and we'd really like to contribute. So we're trying to learn from others, and we're trying to create a strategy to help us to get there. So the first thing we've done, I've already mentioned it, is the Environmental Task Force. This is a forum that's not just made of Scottish companies, but that anybody can join. And we have people from all over the UK, and indeed companies from outside the UK too, that are operating in different areas that feed into that group and allow us to knowledge share and give us some ideas on where we're going. The stage we're at the moment, the AstroAgency is supporting Scottish Government and Space Scotland on, is to build a roadmap. So what does the next couple of years look like when it comes to sustainable space, and how do we make sure that we're moving there together as an industry, and that the full sector, all those hundreds of companies that I talked about earlier, indeed thousands in the UK space companies, and all the companies that are going to move into the space sector, either as startups or from other sectors, how do we make sure that they are also behind this movement? So it's about building a roadmap and starting to define milestones around what we need to achieve in order to move things forward. What we've not done yet, but I believe will be the next step after the roadmap is created, will be to create an environmental strategy focused on space and focused on collaboration. I don't believe there's an environmental strategy for a national space sector anywhere in the world. So I think this is a great opportunity for us in Scotland. And I would say to any country out there that's looking at sustainability to consider this. And I think ultimately, this is lots of talking and writing. We need action at the end of this. And again, it's not something that Scotland can solve on our own. So it's about collaboration. Yes, we can make sure that our launch vehicles and our spaceports are thinking about sustainability and are driving towards net zero. There's various ways we can do that we will build into the strategy and build into the roadmap. And that might be around signing pledges or around, funding incentivizations, or maybe you don't get funding if you're not operating in a sustainable way. There's lots of ideas that we've not quite written out or defined yet, but those are the types of things that we're thinking about that will lead to the action, because you can't just be talking, guys. It has to be real action at the end of it. And yeah, working collaboratively with various different initiatives and countries around the world. That's absolutely key. And earlier this year, when we actually launched our Scottish space strategy, we did it at the Expo Dubai. And it was a great experience, and I was really delighted to speak with the UAE Space Agency there about what they're doing around sustainability. And they're another space nation that are very, very much taking this seriously and looking at how they can address this issue with their own forums. And again, why just do that independently? Why should we all be doing that in silos? We should be doing it together and making sure that we create this movement as one, because if you can't combine and collaborate in space, then where can you possibly collaborate? So European Space Agency is an organization that we've been working with, as you know, as I've mentioned already, on the Challenges Initiative, and that we're continuing to work with. They recently launched an environmental charter, a charter for responsible use of space. And that's something that we're looking to have companies in Scotland sign up to. We're working with environmental groups. They were part of our Challenges Initiative, and we're very lucky to be working with them and to hear from them, because we need to listen to the environmental groups. They can help us to be guided in the right direction. So that collaboration is very important. They can also tell us when we're not doing good enough, we're not doing a good job, and we need to listen to that. We need to be held accountable if we're going to take this seriously. Universities too, and in this case, I've mentioned the University of Texas at Austin, particularly because of Moraba, who's a real specialist when it comes to Moraba Jai is a real specialist when it comes to LEO and sustainability in LEO, this idea of cleaning up space. So we're enjoying working with him. He's also a Global Scot, which is a group in Scotland where again, we come together and we help people from different sectors. And I think that idea of cross sectors, different sectors, is very important here too, because let's face it, it's not just space that's on a sustainability journey. Every industry you can imagine right now is thinking about how it can be more sustainable. And so we're speaking with the Whisky Association, which is very typical because we're Scottish, of course we're speaking to the Whisky Association. But the Whisky Association in Scotland is it's an industry, the whisky industry, that for a long time was known as a polluter. Because of the waste into the wastewater into rivers, etc. But now it's an area that environmental groups are really applauding and they're very impressed with, because it's really turned things around. And they recently launched their own sustainability strategy for the whisky sector. So that's something that we need to know about, and the space sector in Scotland are liaising with that industry to find out how did they do it, how did they turn things around, and what are their next steps. We're also looking at transportation, we're looking at food and drink industries, we're looking at every industry and any industry in the UK or beyond that can show really strong progress in the area of sustainability. And we had COP26, which was a major UN environmental event happen in Scotland this year. It was in Glasgow, actually. And again, we were able to go and talk about sustainability there. And that's why I'm here today talking. That's why I was talking in Dubai about sustainability. Because of that collaboration, we want others to come and join what we're doing to help us, to guide us, or indeed listen to us so that we can help to work and share our knowledge with different people from different countries. And that's the only way to truly tackle sustainable space. You can't do it on your own. I've not really got the answer today, but we can do it together 100%. So thank you very much for listening to that. And I'd really like to hear from you. It'd be great to hear from you. Do get in touch if you'd like to be part of our initiatives or share some ideas with us, or if you'd like to know more about AstroAgency or Space Scotland, then please do reach out. This is this strange looking thing in the middle here is a QR code that should link to my LinkedIn page. But if not, anyway, there's my email address as well. And just to finish, at AstroAgency, we run an initiative called the Space Bar as well. And that brings together people from all around the world, actually. We started it in lockdown when there was no space events, and you're all at a space event today. I wish I could be there. And I'm off to the Euroconsult one for the World Satellite Business Forum, World Satellite Business Week in Paris. And it's great, you know, we really rely on these kind of events in the space sector. So when the pandemic hit, we lost that ability. So AstroAgency started our space bar for some virtual whiskies. And we basically invited anybody just to come on and talk about what they're doing in space. And we have our 50th space bar in January. It's an event that happens, it was every week, and then it was every 2 weeks. And now that we're kind of getting back to normal and going to events again to a degree, we now do it every month. But I just wanted to invite anybody who's watching today to come along to our space bar. You can go to our LinkedIn page and you can sign up. It is a virtual event. We have done them in person though as well, which is really exciting, but it is a virtual event. And you know, no surprise, sustainability is a theme that regularly comes up in our space bar. So everybody, any space company, or if you're a student interested in space, no matter what your angle is, come along to the space bar, chat to people from all around the world, and we'd really love to welcome you there. And I think really that's the end. So thanks once again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Take care.